Donald Trump is in the Epstein files. He's in the Epstein emails. He is acting guilty and cornered about being implicated in what has been now the first major release of information from the Epstein estate, from inside Jeffrey Epstein's materials, things that his estate had to legally hold on to after he died. And the way Trump is acting explains to some degree why he has broken such a big campaign promise. And we also have new reporting from Congress suggesting that we get a vote soon, a vote that could include a lot of Republicans and could ultimately lead to the release of more materials. I'm Ari Melber, MSNBC anchor and lawyer, and I'm going to do this new YouTube breakdown as we are now a couple days into a story that many people thought would never occur. Even if nothing else happens in this case, there are now 20,000 more pieces of evidence in public. This is the beginning of the transparency that was campaigned on and promised by Donald Trump and his Republican allies, then that Democrats in the main were pushing for in the House, far more Democrats than Republicans in Congress, and now Democrats having released 3 emails, basically 3 pieces of information they thought were important but also clearly damaging to Donald Trump, implicating him in Epstein's sort of dead hand, his prior written emails. That led to 20,000 more emails being released, and now, as I'm going to explain, a lot of pressure to have the vote that Donald Trump and Republican Speaker Johnson have spent literally months fighting against even having an up or down vote, let alone getting the material. And so this is my YouTube. You can subscribe for these kind of breakdowns. I'm going to talk both about what's in the emails, what's really known in the evidence, what's factual, not just what people might be interested politically in seeing happen, and some of the process here. So let's start with how we got the new material. This evidence was handed over to the Congress. The Congress had it, but Republicans, following Trump's requests and orders, didn't want to release it. The Democrats went through it, and to get the process going, or at least to do what they said was important, they released some of the material. And then notice what happened right after that. The Republicans, apparently upset that the material that was released focused on Trump, said, okay, let's release a bunch more. And so you went from basically a binary of total secrecy to some transparency to more transparency. And now the Republican Speaker Johnson, who had been fighting this for months, who literally wouldn't convene Congress, would delay for weeks seating a new member and taking these other steps that were just completely strange and unusual, all to try to delay any action on Epstein. And maybe he hoped that, you know, how Washington and politics and life is, that something else would take over and people would move on. That strategy failed. Now Johnson is actually fast-tracking the vote on releasing the files. That's an actual congressional act to try to get more of the files, including what the Justice Department has, what's under the Trump administration's control, and get that out. I worked in Congress a long time ago. It wasn't for me. I didn't stay, but I can tell you that a dynamic that you see there on many issues where the public, often very broadly, 60, even 70% of the public wants something, but Congress is holding back for political interests, political reasons, special interests. But if they actually had to take a vote, because the public might be watching on a big issue, they would support a lot of where the public is. And so we have now a kind of broad call for transparency on Epstein. There are people who just think that the whole thing is crooked and the way the victims were mistreated and the history of this and the way elites seem to get away. People want it for that reason. You have people on the right and MAGA who've been talking about this for years, and you have Democrats who may be motivated for their reasons. But all in, you got a lot of people. And so while the Republicans fought to avoid a vote, they didn't want to have the vote, and status quo would keep this stuff secret, the reports now are 30, 40 members of the Republican Party are expected to potentially back the vote for more files. And remember, if they pass this and it goes to the Republican Senate, there'd be the same type of pressure on them. Would they hold a vote or not? Can you really get away with, after all this, saying that people don't even deserve an up or down vote on where you stand and whether you're going to release this material? Then it goes to the president's desk. He could veto this, but it might be harder for him to veto the actual direct Epstein request as opposed to just the back and forth they've had. Remember, the Trump administration claims they want transparency. They talked about grand jury materials. If he did veto it, then the question is, does the Congress have the votes to override that veto? And for anyone who's cynical or skeptical and says, gosh, well, you don't expect much, fine, we can't predict the future, but I'll just tell you, having been reporting this, it is extraordinary to see we've gone from no action and Republicans saying they were going to hold the line in the House to being overridden by a bipartisan group led by Democrats, but with some Republicans, to force the vote. And now it's what in the House is called log rolling sometimes. Everybody's over here. They don't want to act for the reasons I said. But then when they're forced to stand up in public before you, the people, and actually hold a vote, well, one positive thing, whatever the issue is, suddenly you see the pressure work, and they go from no vote to log rolling means you could have dozens more people join in. So what was a no vote issue or a split issue suddenly becomes overwhelmingly people on one side. So that's how this could come out. The emails that came out against Trump looked very bad because they showed that when Epstein thought he was secretly talking to his co-conspirator Maxwell, they both took it as a common fact that Trump had spent hours with a victim, that he knew, quote, about the girls, that he basically was someone who back in the day was around Epstein, around this life and world, and had knowledge of a criminal sex trafficking ring. That's a big deal. It does not alone serve as evidence against Trump in a criminal setting. You'd need a lot more context. You'd need an investigation. And if this were the worst of it, say these emails were, quote, the worst of it for Trump, you would expect that he would do what he's done in other situations, and he's had other legal problems, where you respond to the thing, you say, okay, now it's old news and move on, or you say, bring out whatever else you have because this is the worst of it. You've kind of met that moment. Notice Donald Trump now, days into the email crisis, is doing the opposite. He's panicking. He reportedly convened a weird, unusual White House Situation Room meeting. That's a place for dealing with a nuclear threat or war. And they went after one of the Republican members there. They called her in and tried to pressure her on whatever alleged national security grounds to not support this transparency. And then in public, he's acting like the Epstein files coming out, the rest of the material would be bad, which means worse than this. So he's acting guilty and suspicious. We can't, in journalism, tell you that means he's guilty or what it is he's worried about in there, but only he knows why he thinks it would be worse for the rest of it to come out. That's very different from someone who says, hey, even if they made a mistake or something looks bad, let's get all the evidence in and it will ultimately clear them. So that's sort of a tell. Then you have the fact that allegedly, reportedly, the Attorney General and others already briefed Trump about his presence in the files. Whether that means it's kind of like the emails we saw or something worse, or he was given specific material, we don't know. But he has been told that, and he's fighting to keep it out. We also have something I've mentioned in our reporting that gets a little more weedsy, which is the Justice Department being pulled into what looks like an illicit cover-up. I've talked to lawyers who say that the Attorney General and the Deputy Attorney General, the way they went in and both interviewed Maxwell and then moved her to this more lenient facility where she's getting special treatment, could end up being a legal infraction, the kind of thing that could get you professionally punished or even disbarred. We've seen other lawyers who work for Trump face that kind of consequence. And that matters because all of this is putting pressure on the government. The Trump administration may be misusing the government both as an arm to go after critics, and I'll say more on that in a moment, but also to literally do a cover-up in a federal sex trafficking probe. That's a big deal. And they may be losing their grip on power faster than they realize, partly because of things like this and other things, the economy, the failure to deliver on promises from last year, 1 year into the Trump term. But you could have a midterms that transfers subpoena power back to the opposition party. You could have a lot more oversight over what's going on and questions about this, because Donald Trump's former criminal defense attorney, Todd Blanche, who defended him in New York, went in and did this unusual jailhouse meeting. Now, at the time, we reported why it was unusual. But that doesn't rule out that there could be something we don't know that made it more valid, say a lead in the case. Then we got the actual audio of the interview, and it was very odd because it didn't seem to be trying to get actual information or do law enforcement. It seemed to just be getting Maxwell to put on record her sort of defense of or clearing of Donald Trump. Now, with these new emails, we can credibly look at the evidence, and it shows how bad that interview was by Mr. Blanche. It shows that it was not proper, and it shows that if any proper investigation had all this material, which you would get, you subpoena emails and texts, of course, in any case, let alone one against a sex trafficker, he didn't use those materials. Now, I and others reported this. This is actually a very straightforward legal thing. Not everyone knows how this works, but people who do obviously saw with the emails that he didn't present to Maxwell, well, you're saying Trump was never involved in anything now while you're in prison and under pressure, but here's what you said in email at the time when you thought no one was listening. Here's what you said to Epstein. Does that refresh your recollection? This is the type of thing you would have done. And how do you know that the facts can matter? Well, Mr. Blanche, the Deputy Attorney General, #2 in the Justice Department, huge important job. deals with federal cases, counterterror, all of it. He's speaking out, he's using X to defend himself because apparently he feels that the actual record, how he did his interview, we have it, and now the evidence he didn't use, we have it, makes him look terrible. So he posted on X that he actually didn't do a bad job because he now says law enforcement didn't have those materials. Well, that's a huge problem. Either he's telling total truth and that the DOJ in no way had those emails, which is a huge problem. Why didn't they go get the basic emails that Congress very quickly could get from the estate and that they should have had earlier? Or is he being cute? Because I can tell you, as a reporter and a lawyer myself, people use words sometimes to hide behind them, and he didn't say his office or the Justice Department didn't have those materials. He just said, quote, law enforcement. And that may leave him what he thinks is a technical dodge later, if he's in a deposition or under oath, to say, well, maybe someone at Main Justice had him, but he was meaning by law enforcement only his own office or only the law enforcement officials who were with him that day. I say all that because he's clearly under pressure. Other people are feeling the pressure, even if they're acting differently. And that's a really shoddy defense. Final point I want to make in this breakdown is Donald Trump, by Friday, was saying, well, this is a hoax, it's not real, but also he's going to ask the DOJ to investigate opponents and others who are involved in this. Number one, it's improper for the president to try to respond to the governing process, the transparency process, and DOJ and Congress by going after opponents. Of course, he's already done this because he's requested that opponents, people in the opposition or his critics, be indicted. So that is a backdrop to this. But now he's doing it specifically on the Epstein story. And both things cannot be true. It can't be a hoax, but one that also he wants it to lead to investigations of other people. You don't investigate a hoax as if it was real. And if it's real, well, there's a bunch of evidence tying back and implicating him, not only as a person, did he have knowledge of illegal sex trafficking, or did his government, his administration, have misconduct or special treatment for the trafficker? His own cabinet figure has said that Epstein did blackmail. Trump famously promoted the original prosecutor, Acosta, who gave the sweetheart deal to Epstein, which nobody defends anymore. So either there are real significant questions about this, in which case they should be dealt with, or it's a hoax, that's his other defense. But either way, asking for an investigation of opponents of a hoax makes no sense. And so while there are some people who might just follow a headline or be distracted by that, we're also seeing the limits of what is that kind of frankly misleading or autocratic response. If anybody is involved in this in a way that raises legal questions, they of course should be investigated from the beginning, not as a distraction for the president and not late to the party. All of this should have been investigated to begin with. But for Donald Trump to think that he's going to try this tactic and it's going to distract the MAGA base, many of whom have been told by him and Bondi and Megyn Kelly and others that this material should come out, that's going to distract them or it's going to distract his opponents. What we're seeing is the thinness of that kind of cynical and potentially abuse of power tactics. So yes, bring on all of the transparency, evidence, and information. If there's investigations to be done, it is bad. It is a type of guilt for the president to admit that they hadn't been done. He didn't care about them, but now that he's under pressure, he wants them done. It's incredibly cynical to say that out loud, as he has said, when you're talking about a sex trafficker who abused young women and girls. That's been documented, and that if there are other crimes that have not been fully investigated, the cynicism of that, I don't think, will sit well with a lot of people. So just looking at my notes, again, I'll do these YouTube breakdowns. You can subscribe to my channel, Ari Melber. I wanted to see here, was there anything else I wanted to hit in this breakdown? Just the final point that the transparency is coming. I get why people are cynical, and I discussed how the Congress has been really delaying any effort to do what they said they were going to do under Republican Speaker Johnson. And I've said before, there are Democrats who showed less interest in this issue in the past years and now have embraced it. And so anyone can follow all the politics of that. But at the end of the day, we all know politics can be cynical and messy. The question for justice, for the truth of getting evidence in an important case like this, and justice, whether there's more justice to be done through a nonpartisan real process, may run through some political dynamics. But right now, those dynamics are running against the elites, against those trying to have secrecy and bury whatever is left here, and in the other direction. I'll do a future breakdown with more excerpts from these emails. The big ones obviously got some news, but there are a heck of a lot more. And again, we talk about what's the role of finding facts or journalism these days, the difference between actually looking at material versus just people following whatever narrative they want. You yourself can go on, if you Google, there's now a searchable version of the database. Took like a day, but a newspaper set it up. Again, shout out to newspapers and journalists who do the real work, and that means you, the people, anyone, can go in there and look at these emails. I was looking at some that involve Michael Wolff and Steve Bannon. There's one that has Bannon talking about their concerns about when Michael Cohen was flipping and cooperating in public. The Trump officials were all playing that down. In private, Epstein is talking to others about whether this is bad. And I've got some of those here, but I think this has run long enough. I'll do that in another video. And again, if you have questions or things that you are interested in legally or otherwise for these kind of more in-depth breakdowns, throw them in the comments. I'll look at some of those. You can subscribe to Ari Melber and stay informed.